Assalamu alaikum, dear sisters and brothers. Inshallah, tonight is our last lecture with our guest speaker, Dr. Sadik Kassim. And I'll leave the podium for him with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu ala al-Hussain. Assalamu ala Ali ibn al-Hussain. Assalamu ala awlad al-Hussain. Assalamu ala ashab al-Hussain. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيب قلوبنا السراج المنير المصطفى الأمجد أبا القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. أما بعد، يقول الله في المحكم بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم واعلموا أن الله يحول بين المرء وقلبه وأنه إليه تحشرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. There's a famous hadith that all of the schools of thought agree upon, and all of you are familiar with this hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ says, Husaynun minni wa ana min Husayn. Ahabba Allah man ahabba Husayna. It seems like what the Prophet is trying to tell us is that if we want to understand Hussein, we need to understand the Prophet, and vice versa. If we want to understand the Prophet, we need to understand Imam Hussein. These two things are interlinked and they're dependent on each other. So tonight we want to go over this hadith in depth and specifically try to understand what the Prophet is trying to tell us. Because if you look at it from a biological perspective, this hadith makes absolutely no sense. How can Husaynun be minni wa ana min Husayn? The first part makes sense, Husaynun minni, because he's the grandson of the Prophet. But the second part, wa ana min Husayn, meaning I am from Hussein, that makes no biological sense, because Imam Hussein is the grandson of the Prophet, so the grandson cannot give birth to the grandfather. So what is the Prophet ﷺ trying to tell us? So the point here that we'll go over is we'll try to understand the advantage or the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll try to understand how the events of Karbala are interlinked with the message of the Prophet and vice versa. The message of Imam Hussein is interlinked with the message of the Prophet. So what do we know about the Prophet ﷺ? As all of you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us what the role of the Prophet was. The role of the Prophet was as a source of mercy. Source of mercy for who? For the Iraqiyin? No. He says لِلْعَالَمِينَ. A source of mercy for the Lebananiyin? No. For the Magharba? No. For the Ajam? No. It says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. For all of humanity and for all of creation. Now someone from the non-Muslim faith may come and say, well, demonstrate to me that the Prophet is a man of mercy. The Prophet ﷺ died over 1400 years ago. How can you tell me that the Prophet ﷺ was a man of mercy if we've never benefited from the Prophet? Meaning, you see the news events on the news, you see that so-called Islamists are bombing things left and right. Is this the message of the Prophet? If he's a man of mercy, the people who follow the message of the Prophet should by extension be a mercy as well. Because if you claim to follow an individual who's a man of mercy, then as a follower, you should be a man of mercy as well, right? This just makes logical sense. If you follow someone who's an oppressor or who's a zalim, then you, as his follower, will most likely be an oppressor or a zalim. But if you follow a man of rahmah, then you yourself should be a man of rahmah. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean when He tells us, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ? We'll go over this after a loud salawat. The best way to judge an individual is by judging their actions according to their words. Meaning, if an individual or if someone claims to be something, there's a saying, actions speak louder than words. All of you are familiar with this saying. I can tell you that I'm the smartest, most handsome person in the world, but the actions of the individual should actually reflect the reality. And this is something that all of us judge on a regular basis. We judge a person not by what they say, because talk is cheap. Anyone can say anything, but rather by what their actions tell us about their character. So let's judge the Prophet ﷺ by his own words and see if his actions actually matched his words, and see whether his actions actually reflect him as being a mercy or as being a source of oppression for mankind. There's a famous hadith that's related in all of the schools of thought, both the Ahlul Sunnah and the followers of Ahlillbait. The Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ صَدَقَ جَارِيَةٍ أَوْ عِلْمٌ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ أَوْ وَلَدٌ صَالِحٍ يَدْعُو لَهُ. So when an individual dies, all of their actions come to an end. It doesn't matter whether you have a fancy house on the top of Montreal, or it doesn't matter if you have a fancy car in your driveway. It doesn't matter what type of degree you have, because all of those things will come to an end when you die, except 3 things that you leave as a legacy that enables people to either judge you as a good person or a bad person. What are these 3 things according to the Prophet? إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. 3 things. Let's go into these 3 things in detail. The first thing that the Prophet talks about is the concept of sadaqah jariyah. What is sadaqah jariyah? All of you are familiar with the concept of sadaqah. So for example, if you see a homeless man, or if you see an individual on the street that requires some help or some monetary support, you give him some money. This one-time act of charity is considered an act of sadaqah. So the Prophet ﷺ has recommended that we give sadaqah, or we give charity, on a daily basis. Al-sadaqah tab'id al-bala, or the sadaqah prevents the negative actions. So this is the type of charity that all of us are familiar with, the concept of a one-time act of charity. Now the issue with this one-time act of charity is, after you've made the donation, or after you've given this act of charity, as soon as the individual uses the thing which you've given them, then the reward that you get from that act of charity disappears. Meaning what? Let me break it down. If you give a homeless person or someone who's needy on the street $5, you'll get the reward for giving him $5. As soon as he goes to Tim Hortons and buys some Timbits and eats those Timbits, those rewards go away from you. So this is a one-time act of charity. However, a sadaqah jariyah is an act of charity that you give to an individual. Long after you've given that act of charity, the person will continue to benefit from in the long term. Now this is an important concept in the history of early Islam. And we'll go over why it's important, but first please give me a loud salawat. The early Muslim community in Medina was a community that lacked material resources. For example, you had some of the people called Ahlillbait, or the people of the bench. They lived on a bench in the city of Medina, and they had no adequate resources for themselves. The Prophet ﷺ recognized that if you want to create a sustainable community, you need to create opportunities for individuals that will enable everyone to succeed. There was an ayah, ayah revealed during the time of the Prophet, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believers, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. You will never attain righteousness, or you will never attain goodness, bir. Meaning, if you want to become a good person, what's the secret? لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. Until you spend out of that which you love. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. And whatever you spend in the source or in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing about this. Now when this ayah was revealed, many of the people came to the Prophet and said, you know, what does this ayah mean? There was one particular individual, a man named Abu Talha al-Ansari. He came to the Prophet, he said, Ya Rasulullah, what does this ayah mean? the Prophet ﷺ told him, if you love Allah and if you want to sacrifice for the benefit of the community, you need to give out of something which you love. If you love property, for example, give some of your property for the sake of Allah. If you love money, give some of your money for the sake of Allah. Abu Talha al-Ansari said to the Prophet, my most beloved possession or my most beloved asset is a series of gardens called Bir Hay or Abyar Hay. He said, I will donate this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What did the Prophet do when he took this gardens? He took these gardens and he used these gardens for the benefit of the community. Meaning what? Meaning whatever fruits and vegetables came out of this garden, the income from this garden would go back to the poor people of early Islam, Ahl al-Safa and the other poor individuals. So Abu Talha al-Ansari, by making this one-time act of charity, benefits from Sadaqah Jariyah, not only for the one time that he gave money, but rather whenever people use that resource or that asset, Abu Talha al-Ansari will benefit. When this ayah was revealed, all of the people tried to sacrifice and donate for the sake of Allah within the context of Sadaqah Jariyah. Meaning anyone can give a one-time act of charity, but strategically, for a community to succeed and for a community to survive, you need to think long-term. Meaning, you need to think not just of tomorrow, you need to think 10 years from now. How will this community be successful? How will this community be financed with respect to money? All of the people started to think with respect to Sadaqah Jariyah. Imam Ali alayhi salam, for example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you to go to Hajj inshallah, there's a series of wells outside of Medina called Abyar Ali, or the wells of Ali. What are Abyar Ali? The Imam Ali alayhi salam, in his spare time, would dig these wells so that travelers had a place that they could go and drink water. So remember, back then when people were traveling long distances, there was no such thing as a rest station or a gas station. People would become thirsty. Imam Ali alayhi salam dug these wells so that when travelers were traveling from point A to point B, they could stop at these wells. People still go to Abyar Ali. There's a masjid over there called Masjid al-Shajara. This is one of the places where we actually wear the ihram. It's called a miqat. So imagine that. Something that Imam Ali alayhi salam did over 1400 years ago, people are still benefiting from to this day. Imam Ali alayhi salam and the others weren't just thinking of a one-time act of charity, but rather thinking strategically. And I should make a point here. Sadaqah Jariyah was used not by only the Muslims, but also by the non-Muslims. Let me tell you the story of a man named Muharram. Muharram, and this story, by the way, is recognized in the seerah of Ibn Ishaq, among other seerahs or biographies of the Prophet. Muharram was a Jewish rabbi who was one of the members of the Jewish tribes of Medina. Muharram, according to the Prophet ﷺ, was the best of the Jews. Why was Muharram the best of the Jews? Muharram was participating with the Prophet in all of the events. So for example, there was the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud, so there were some Muslims that refused to participate with the Prophet. Muharram, even though it was the day of the Sabbath, and remember on the day of the Sabbath the Jews are supposed not to work, on the day of the Sabbath, Muharram said, forget the Sabbath, there's something more important, we have to defend our own existence. Muharram participated in the Battle of Uhud. Now what happened? Muharram was wounded on the battlefield. But as he was wounded, as he was on the battlefield, he sent word to the Prophet that when I die, I possess gardens in the city of Medina. I want you to use those gardens for the sake of the Muslim community. So Muharram, even though he was a non-Muslim, donated his entire income and his entire land property for the sake of the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ used this income to support the early Muslim community. So Sadaqah Jariyah, according to the fuqaha, or according to the historical concepts, Sadaqah Jariyah is a continuous act of charity. Now, early on, the Muslim community was fairly, they weren't really very wealthy. So they would donate of things that they possessed. So for example, if you owned an oasis or a farm or something like that, you would donate that. But as the Muslim empire expanded, there were greater opportunities to give wealth. So Sadaqah Jariyah expanded from simply, gardens and oases into other things. It developed into the concept of waqf, which is a Muslim economic concept in Islam. What is a waqf? Waqf is anything that you possess, you dedicate it for the sake of the benefit of the Muslim community. So for example, if you have something that you want the people of Masjid Ahlillbait to benefit from, you can establish a waqf in this masjid. Say like, I'm going to build a bookshelf that's going to be a waqf for the community of Masjid Ahlillbait. So the concept of waqf is an extension of Sadaqah Jariyah. Why is the concept of waqf important? Because as the Muslim community expanded, their needs and their desires expanded as well. The early Muslims only needed some shelter and some food. But as the Muslim community expanded, people had desires and needs for other things. They needed somewhere where they could go to get treated if they had some sickness or some disease. They needed institutes of higher learning. The Muslims, they used the concept of Sadaqah Jariyah in a creative way, so that they started to, rather than just donating land and property, they started to establish awqaf, or something that's committed for the sake of Islam, for the benefit of the Muslim community. So for example, the earliest hospitals that we know of in the world were awqaf that were established by the early Muslims. In fact, with respect to universities, many people think that the first university in the world is Oxford University, or maybe Cambridge University, or maybe the Sorbonne. But what people don't understand is actually, according to UNESCO, the United Nations, the oldest university in the world is the University of Al-Qarawwayn. Al-Qarawwayn is located in Fez, Morocco. Let me tell you a little about the Jami'at Al-Qarawwayn in Fez, Morocco. But first, give me a loud salawat. There was a lady named Fatima al-Fihri. Her nickname was al-Banin. And Fatima al-Fihri, her father passed away. He was a wealthy merchant. She's of Tunisian origin. When her father passed away, he gave her some money. And she was confused. She didn't really know what to do with that money. So then someone suggested to her, well, why don't you use this money to establish a waqf, an institute of higher learning? So what Fatima al-Fihri did is she established Jami'at al-Qarawwayn in Fez, Morocco, first as a masjid, but then also as an institute of higher learning. And that's why historically people say that the first university did not actually occur in the Western world like Oxford or Cambridge, but actually was invented or discovered by Fatima al-Fihri. What inspired Fatima al-Fihri? The idea of Sadaqah Jariyah. She thought that if I want to benefit my community for the sake of Allah, I don't just give some money and then people spend it, but I think long-term, strategically. What will my community benefit from the most? And she thought at that time that the community would benefit most from having an institute of higher learning. In fact, this was a really important university, Jami'at al-Qarawwayn in medieval times. It was founded in the year 859 AD, so about so a long time ago. And by contrast, Oxford and Cambridge were founded in the year 1050 or so. So Jami'at al-Qarawwayn was an important university, and you had many non-Muslims studying at this university, including a pope. There was a pope that studied at this university, a pope named Pope Sylvester. Pope Sylvester was historically called the Muslim Pope because he spent so much time in the Muslim world. What was Pope Sylvester doing in Jami'at al-Qarawwayn? He was studying mathematics. The Arabs at the time were the only people that had what we now know as the Arabic numerals. So before that time, everyone had the Roman numerals. You know the Roman numerals, they're very difficult to actually do calculations. The Arabs had the Arabic numerals that they got from the Indians. And this type of mathematics, where we, using the Arab numerals, was being taught at Jami'at al-Qarawwayn. So Pope Sylvester was very, he had a great aspiration to study mathematics. He couldn't study it in Europe, so he was forced to go to Jami'at al-Qarawwayn. My point being that the early Muslims took the example of the Prophet. When the Prophet ﷺ says, إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية. The early Muslims were inspired by the example of the Prophet. They donated things that benefited the community. But as things progressed and as the community expanded, the Muslims became more creative in how they used the concept of sadaqah jariyah and awqaf for the benefit not only of the Muslim community, but for all of humanity. In fact, how important is the concept of sadaqah jariyah or waqf in human history? The United Nations a few years ago had a report on what they considered the most important economic concepts in the history of mankind. And they said far and away, the most important economic concept is the concept of waqf. Why is the concept of waqf or sadaqah jariyah the most important? Because they say, without sadaqah jariyah, without waqf, we would have no universities like Oxford and Harvard and Cambridge and McGill and Concordia. Without the concept of sadaqah jariyah, we would have no hospitals and places where people could get treated. So here, just in this concept of sadaqah jariyah, you notice that all of humanity was benefiting from this example of the Prophet. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever is written in this book, it's serious. It's not just something that we're over-exaggerating and saying that the Prophet was the greatest of people. This is a fact. People are benefiting from the example of the Prophet long after the death of the Prophet. And this is only one example. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ says that when an individual dies, they leave three things behind. One of them is sadaqah jariyah. We'll go over the other two things after a loud salawat. The second thing that the Prophet talks about, إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به, a piece of beneficial knowledge or information. Quran is unique among world religions in that it placed a great emphasis on the written word. Meaning what? Meaning you look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly tells mankind that we have taught you using the pen or using the pencil. الذي علم بالقلم, not الذي علم بالكلام or الذي علم بالروايات, ولكن الذي علم بالقلم. The great advantage of the Quran, and we've talked about this in the previous nights, is it's the only book that we know of that was immediately written down during the time of its revelation. It wasn't written 200 or 300 years after the final revelation. Now, why is this important? Ilm, and we talked about ilm last night, is one of the important things that an individual leaves behind when they die. You notice when you ask people, who do you think the greatest individuals in history are? People oftentimes refer to people like Einstein, like Thomas Edison. What did these people do? Did these people have lots of money, or did these people have big weapons, or did these people have governments? No. These people left behind some beneficial knowledge that humanity is benefiting from. By the Quran placing emphasis on the written word, it created a complete revolution in the way that people approached their societies. So I'll give you an example. There's a book recently that was published by a professor at Oxford University. The book is called The Enlightenment Quran, and it's written by a man named Ziyad al-Masrafi. And what does this book say? Ziyad al-Masrafi looks at the Enlightenment period. So as all of you know, Europe was in a period of dark ages. But all of a sudden, somewhere after the Middle Ages, something happened to the European continent, and the people went out of darkness into light. This period is commonly known as the Renaissance. So historians have been trying to understand, what is it that caused Europe to go out of darkness into light? Ziyad al-Masrafi goes back and he looks at the historical record, and he says that one of the greatest catalysts, or one of the greatest agents of change that enabled Europe to come out of darkness was the Quran. Meaning what? How does he explain it? He says many of the early thinkers and philosophers during the Enlightenment period or before the Enlightenment period had copies of the Quran. And he lists people like Rousseau. We talked about Rousseau last night. He lists the German philosopher Goethe, and he lists Napoleon, for example, among many others. He says that when these people had a copy of the Quran, there is physical, historical evidence that these people were affected by it to a certain extent. So when the Prophet ﷺ says, "Ilmun yuntafa'u bih," the greatest ilm that mankind can benefit from is this Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this is a source of guidance. And we talked about ilm last night, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, other than saying that ilm is one of the greatest legacies of the prophets and the anbiya. So please give me a lot of salawat. The third thing that an individual leaves behind, according to the Prophet, إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له. The third thing that an individual leaves behind, and that's a reflection of their contribution to society, is a walad salih, or a child who does good deeds. Now, this is an important concept, and I'm going to spend some time here. One time, a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked the Prophet, who is the best of people? Who's the best of people? If I want to be considered a good person, how do I be considered? How can I become a good person? The Prophet responded to the man by saying, خيركم خيركم لأهله وأنا خيركم لأهلي. The best of you is the one who is the best to his family, and I am the best towards my family. In fact, you'll look at early Islam, there's a great emphasis towards the family. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ وَفِصَالَهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. The only instance in the Quran where Allah mentions Himself on the same level as a human individual. اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ. Wa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making the parents almost equivalent to Allah with respect to having gratitude for them. There's great emphasis in the Quran and in the example of the Prophet on the concept of family. And we can spend a lot of time talking about how Islam, the focus of the family in Islam compared to other religions, but I'm not going to spend too much time. I just want to give you two quick examples to compare and contrast Islam's position on the family compared to other religions. So for example, in the religion of Buddhism, we know historically that the Buddha was a Hindu prince who was living in a castle. He had a young son and he had a wife. The Hindu prince felt that if he wanted to attain enlightenment, he had to leave his family and he had to go on a journey. And that's where Hinduism and that's where Buddhism sort of developed. One day the Hindu prince, the Gorana, was sitting under a tree called the Bodhi tree, and then he attained enlightenment. So that's why you notice that in the Buddhist tradition, family is considered an obstacle towards actually achieving enlightenment. The Hindu prince had to leave his family to actually obtain enlightenment. He didn't actually stay with his family. And you'll notice today with the Buddhist monks, if you want to become a Buddhist monk, the first thing that you have to do is you have to abandon your family and you have to abandon your material possessions in order to become an enlightened Buddha. Christianity, by extension, the Catholic faith specifically, also has a similar concept. So you'll notice, for example, in the book of Luke, the chapter Luke in the Bible, there's a story where someone comes to the prophet Jesus in the Bible, and we won't get into the details, but anyway, an individual comes to the prophet and he says, I want to join you, but I have to bury my father who's just passed away. And then in the book of Luke, the historical Jesus of the Bible says, forget about your father, let the dead bury the dead. Meaning, if your father is dead, don't worry about him. If you want to join me, you have to come and join me right now. So this is in the book of Luke. That's why you'll notice today that if you want to become a Catholic priest, the first thing that you have to take is a vow of abstinence, meaning that you promise if you join the church that you don't marry, that you don't take a family, that you live a hermetic existence simply devoted to God. But Islam, by contrast, emphasizes that your family is not an obstacle towards achieving the benefits of Allah, but rather your family is the way that you'll become closer to Allah. خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ. One time an individual came to the Prophet, and this was during the battle of Uhud, before the battle of Uhud, And he said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to participate with you in the battle. I want to fight with you in the battlefield. The Prophet ﷺ says, Laka abawan, do you have parents? And the man said, yes, I do have parents. And then the Prophet says, فَفِيهِمَا فَجَاهِدْ. If you have parents, you should perform the jihad for your parents, meaning serve your parents. That's a better way to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not by serving on the battlefield, but rather by serving your parents. This is something that doesn't often get covered in the Western media. When they mention jihad, they always mention it in a negative light, saying, look at the Muslims undertaking jihad. But here the Prophet is saying, فَفِيهِمَا فَجَاهِدْ. In your parents, you should struggle, or you should make yourself a servant to your parents. Now, the question becomes, theoretically, it's very nice to say, be good to your family. Theoretically, it's very easy to say, be good to your wife, be good to your children. But practically, how do we achieve this? We'll go into how we practically achieve this after a loud salawat. So one time a man came to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, you've taught us so much. What can we give you as a gift or as some compensation? The Prophet didn't know how to answer. I mean, he didn't want money, he didn't want power. All of you know that the Prophet was doing this for the sake of Allah. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the following ayah in Surah 42, ayah 23. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Say, I ask you for no gift except the love of the family members. إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Now when this ayah was revealed, people asked, Ya Rasulullah, what do you mean? And here I'm going to mention something from the Tafsir al-Kabir of al-Razi. Tafsir al-Kabir of al-Razi is one of the leading mufassirin of our brothers Ahlul Sunnah wa Jama'ah. It's considered one of the most important tafasir. And I just want to mention something here. Whenever we read the Quran, it's very easy to use your own opinion. But it's important that whenever you try to do tafsir of the Quran, that you always use valid sources and you use valid opinions. Because sometimes your own opinion may lead you astray. So whenever you try to understand an ayah, it's always good to go back to see what the scholars and what the previous individuals have looked at. It's very easy to use your intellect, but oftentimes your intellect may be misguided. So here, this is the Tafsir al-Kabir of al-Razi, one of the leading scholars of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He goes on to say about this ayah, لما أنزل الله عز وجل قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى قالوا يا رسول الله من هؤلاء الذين نودهم. Who are these people, Ya Rasulullah? You say, I ask you for no reward except for the love of the family. They're saying, which family are you talking about? من هؤلاء الذين نودهم. Who are we supposed to love? The Prophet ﷺ said, Ali wa Fatima wa abnahuma. And then Razi goes on to say that the family that the Prophet is telling you to love is the family of the Prophet. Imam Ali alayhi salam, Fatima, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain, and their children. Now, let's take a closer look at this ayah. Because oftentimes the translation will oversimplify the meaning of the ayah. And this is a classic example of an oversimplification. If you look at the English translation, they translate, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. I ask you for no reward except for the love of the family. The Arabic word is mawadda. The English word is love. Now, why is this problematic? Linguists tell us that one of the most misused words in the English language is the word love. Think about it. We use the word love to describe our relationships to many different things that are not really related. So, for example, you may say, like, I love pizza, right? Or 2 nights from now, you're going to have qima. I say, I love qima, right? We also use the same word, love, to describe what you feel towards your mother and father. I love my mother. I love my father. Same word that you're using to describe 2 different, completely different relationships. Your love of qima should not be equal to your love of your mother or your father. But here you're using the same word, love, right? The Arabic language, by contrast, is a much deeper language. So for example, with respect to the word love, there's at least 10 or 12 different words that describe different aspects of love. There's hub, for example. There's ishq, there's ghaza, there's wid, there's mawadda, and so on and so forth. The Arabic language is a deep language, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses words very specifically in specific instances. So here the word mawadda. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean when He says, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Notice Allah doesn't say, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَحَبَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى or إِلَّا الْعِشْقَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. But He says al-mawadda. Where else have we seen the word mawadda in the Quran? If you turn to Surah Al-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here that among His signs, He's created from you, from among you, your own partners, your own mates, meaning people that you marry to. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ, and He's placed between you, between the husband and the wife, مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Mawadda and rahmah, meaning love, and rahmah and mercy. So what does the word mawadda mean? The word mawadda comes from the Arabic word wid. The word wid is one of the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Asma'ullah al-Husna. Al-Wadud. Al-Wadud. The meaning of Al-Wadud, roughly speaking, is the ever-loving. Meaning it's someone who loves you forever unconditionally. Al-Wadud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's talking about the nature of the relationship between the man and the wife, doesn't say, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَحَبَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Or He says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects you in your own family relationships to have the type of love which is a deep love. It's an ever-loving, it's an ever-continuous love. It's a love that never stops. Mawadda. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called Al-Wadud, meaning the most loving. So here, when you want to understand the word mawadda, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى, the way that we love Ahlillbait is by having this deep-seated connection with them that's almost akin to the relationship that you have with your spouse, with your husband or your wife. You're thinking about them continuously. Am I fulfilling the example of Ahlillbait, or am I simply, do I simply have hope for Ahlillbait? There's a difference. There's a difference between having mawadda for Ahlillbait, and there's a difference between having mahabba for Ahlillbait. Mahabba is when you come for the 10 nights of Muharram, say, yes, I love Ahlillbait. I wore black this year, all year, mashallah, for all 10 nights. I brought a new black shirt. I came here and I listened to, some of what I heard. And then, you forget about it the other 355 days of the year. This is mahabba. Mawadda is when every action that you're doing, that you're performing, you're thinking, am I actually doing this in line with what the Ahlillbait would have done? Or am I doing this against what the Ahlillbait is doing? Salawat. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَدٌ صَالِحٍ يَدْعُو لَهُ, if you want to generate a righteous child or a son that's actually going to benefit your society, the best example that you have in front of you is the Ahlillbait. Study their example. How did the Prophet raise his grandsons? How did the Prophet interact with his wife? How did the Prophet interact with his family members, his uncles and his spouses? Well, the love of Ahlillbait will lead to the love of your family, theoretically. Unfortunately, when it comes to practice, many of us fall short because we only have mahabba for Ahlillbait, we don't have mawadda. So to summarize, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, we've only sent you as a mercy for all of mankind, we can see that when we look at the example of the Prophet, he was a rahmah on all levels. On the very basic level, he was a rahmah with respect to sadaqah jariyah. The concept of sadaqah jariyah or awqaf has enabled society to have universities and hospitals in modern times. On the second level, he was a rahmah with his emphasis on the concept of ilm. Ilmun yuntafa'u bih, meaning the best of people is not the person who's the wealthiest, but the person who benefits society the most with their ilm. And then on the third level, on the personal and on the social level, with the way that you interact with your children. The Imam Hussain alayhi salam was trying to extend the message of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in every aspect. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرَ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. So in the example of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you have the highest code of conduct. For whoever seeks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeks the final day and remembers Allah often. But in the Quran, the ayah that I started off with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, istajibu lillahi wa lirrasuli, idha da'akum lima yuhyikum. Allah is saying, O you who believe, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, answer the call of the Prophet. Istajibu lillahi wa lirrasul. Answer the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet when they call you to the thing which gives you life. Meaning the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that's supposed to give you life. But notice what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing here. He's not addressing the non-believers. He's not saying, Ya ayyuha alladhina kafaru. He's addressing the people who are already believing. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, istajibu lillahi wa lirrasuli idha da'akum lima yuhyikum. This, intellectually, this doesn't make any sense on a logical level. If someone has iman, doesn't that mean that they've already answered the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already called me. I'm a Muslim, I believe, I do salat, but I'm a Muslim, I've answered the call. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognizes that the responding to the call is not simply being born a Muslim, but rather it's in your actions. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu istajibu lillahi wa lirrasuli idha da'akum lima yuhyikum wa'lamu anna Allah yahulu bayna al-mar'i wa qalbihi wa annahu ilayhi tuhsharun. So you have to ask yourself, you as a follower of Ahlillbait, as a follower of the Prophet, have you responded to the call of the Prophet? Meaning, what are you leaving behind for the future generations? Are you leaving behind a sadaqah jariyah? Are you leaving behind some beneficial knowledge? Are you leaving behind some good children? If you're not leaving these things behind, then you're not answering the call of the Prophet. If you're just coming to the programs of Muharram and you're not leaving something beneficial behind, in fact, you're actually causing greater harm for future generations. And you don't have to go any further than Iraq. Iraq today is the country that's closest to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. But look at the situation of Iraq. Look at the situation of Iraqis. By contrast, look at the situation of our non-Muslim brothers and sisters in humanity. Look at the situation of, for example, Japan. The farthest people from Ahlillbait and Islam, but they have a well-organized society that respects people's rights, where people are honest with each other, where people don't take advantage of each other. So just having physical proximity to Imam Hussain is not the same as having spiritual proximity to Imam Hussain. So we want to ask ourselves and answer in the future nights, are we answering the call of the Prophet, or are we simply coming here to try to comfort ourselves and thinking, yes, I'm a believer of Ahlillbait and I'll be saved on the final day of judgment? Your actions are the things that are going to save you, not your presence. The ayah that I recite at the beginning, and this is the ayah that we recite during the month of Ramadan for Da'al Iftitah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. During the month of Ramadan, we only recite this aspect, but there's more to this ayah. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. Laqad ja'at rusulu rabbikum bil haqq wa nudu an tilkum al-jannah urithumuha bima kuntum ta'malun. If you want to earn a prosperous life, or if you want to earn the advantage of heaven or Jannah, وَرِثْتُمُوهَا بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. You will go into Jannah by what you do, not بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَحْضَرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't going to say, yes, mashallah, you attended for the past 30 years the majalis of Imam Hussain, automatic free pass into Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask, what did you use? What did that inspire you into actually committing actions? So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to become of the followers of Ahlillbait and the followers of the Prophet. That like the Prophet, how the Prophet was a mercy to mankind, rahmah lil alameen, we by our example are a rahmah, not just to our own community, but to the larger non-Muslim community. When the non-Muslims look at us, they say, yes, these Muslims are truly a rahmah for the community of Montreal. Yes, these Muslims are truly a rahmah for the community of Canada. These Muslims are truly a rahmah for the community of North America. And not just say that these Muslims are isolated and they live in society and they take from our resources and they never give us anything back. Rather, they say these Muslims are people that participated in our society. Salawat. Imam Hussain alayhi salam was also a mercy for mankind, and we can go into the details. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَدٌ صَالِحٍ يَدْعُو لَهُ, that you have a righteous child that makes dua, probably the greatest example of this is the example of Ali al-Akbar alayhi salam. Ali al-Akbar is the oldest son of Imam Ali, and that's why he's called Ali al-Akbar, or the Ali, the eldest. And it was during the battle of Karbala. Ali al-Akbar goes up to the Imam alayhi salam and says, my father, let me go out and sacrifice myself for the sake of defeating these tyrants and for the sake of defeating these oppressors. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam, this is his oldest son. He's already sacrificed other members of his family. Now he's coming, his oldest son is asking to sacrifice as well. He starts to tear, his eyes start to fill with tears, his beard fills with tears as well. But he says, I'm going to let you go into the battlefield. And he recites the following ayah before he actually sends Ali al-Akbar out into the battlefield. From Surah number 3, ayah 33, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى آدَمَ وَنُوحًا وَآلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَآلَ عِمْرَانَ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ ذُرِّيَّةً بَعْضُهَا مِنْ بَعْضٍ وَاللَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preferred Nuh and Adam and the family of Ibrahim and the family of Imran above all his other creatures. They were descendants of one another, and Allah is al-Sami'un Alim. He's all hearing, all knowing. He sends Ali al-Akbar into the battlefield. Ali al-Akbar is extremely brave. He tears down the enemies, and he goes on to say, أَنَا عَلِيٌّ ibn Hussain ibn Ali. I am Ali, the son of Ali. نَحْنُ وَبَيْتُ اللَّهِ أَوْلَى بِالنَّبِيِّ أَطْعَنَكُمْ بِالرَّمْحِ حَتَّى يُنْشِي أَضْرِبَكُمْ بِالسَّيْفِ أَحْمِي عَنْ أَبِي ضرب غلام هاشمي علوي والله لا يحكم فينا ابن الدعي. I will attack you with my spear until it gets bent. I will defend my father with my sharp sword, as it is expected from a Hashimi, from the line of Imam Ali alayhi salam. How Ibn Ziyad, you dare to order us? Who do you think you are, Ibn Ziyad, to give us orders? We are the family of the most purified. And eventually Imam Hussain alayhi salam witnessed the death and the massacre of his eldest son. But it was all for a greater cause, for the cause of extending the message of the Prophet. Because had Imam Hussain alayhi salam not fought for the message of the Prophet, then these people would have changed it from a message of rahmah into a message of oppression. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a rahmah for all of the alameen, just like the example of the Prophet and the Imams. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَّسِينَا وَأَخْطَأْنَا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Before you go, please, you mentioned the concept of everlasting.
Sorry, just Haji, we would like to open the floor for some questions because it's the last night for him, so just not a long time. If any of the sisters or brothers have any questions, you can ask either by the paper or directly.
Yes. So, everlasting and mawaddah. So we would not like to stay with this concept of love. We would like to stay with the concept of mawaddah. That's why we would like mawaddah with you to come every weekend. How about that?
أسألكم الدعاء إن شاء الله. Thank you. I have mawaddah for this community as well, mashallah. Very, may Allah bless you all. Yeah, affection. Yeah. So the brother asks, what do you think about the concept of affection? Can you elaborate? Oh, instead of love. Yeah, so affection, I think it's a little lighter in terms of the actual emotional connection. So, yeah, connection. Yeah, that's a different way to look at it, I think. Yeah, affection instead of love. So you're affected by, and you're connected by the Ahlillbait. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes. Yeah, so that's according to UNESCO. So I tried to look this up, and it seems that that's, I mean, historically, because maybe Jamaat al-Mustansiriya has been disconnected or maybe not in operation the whole time, يعني. Because, yeah, so that's a good point. So historically, there's still a great debate. So there's still people that say that Oxford is actually the oldest university if you look at it. So it's still a matter of debate. How do you define a university? Yeah, I mean, you could even go further. Why Mustansiriya? Why not the Hawza of Imam Zain al-Abidin, for example? Or the Hawza of Imam al-Baqir, alayhi salam, for example? You can maybe consider that the oldest. Or Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, alayhi salam. Yeah.
As a university, we know that the Mustansiriya
Yes.
may be the first one in the world.
No, so I would, if you have some sources, that would be great, Yani. Maybe we can see this and we can clarify this. Bring it to the attention of UNESCO and others.
There is a mic, a wireless mic, if anybody wants to ask. If the sisters have papers, we can pick them up.
Alaykum as-salam.
I have this question. You mentioned that the waqf started from the saying of the Prophet or the Quran. What they did, non-Muslim, they have waqf, as you said, Oxford is a waqf and other. There was no incident of waqf before Islam?
No, so that's a good point. It's been studied by Western economists. And so one of the famous economists and lawyers is a man named George Mehdi. He's a professor at Loyola University. And he believes that before the concept of waqf, there was no concept of waqf in Western Europe. So up until that point, they would establish things, but they would establish them for the sake of maybe a small group of people. So for example, like hospitals. The Romans had hospitals, but those hospitals weren't for the entire community. They were only for the soldiers, the Roman soldiers. So the concept of waqf says that you intend this for the benefit of the greater community for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Western economists have studied this aspect, and they think that the concept of waqf led to the idea of the trust in the Western legal ideas. So George Mehdi, for example, has traced the evolution of the waqf into the trust, which led to the establishment of Oxford. So he says there's a very direct connection between the waqf all the way to Oxford. So it's very interesting.
We have two questions here. The first one, if we want to contact Dr. Sadik Kassim, how can we do that? And the sister says, I tried searching his name online, I couldn't find anything. Thank you for the knowledge you gave us in 3 days.
Yeah, so the Sayyid can give you my email, inshallah, and if you want to record it, it's shkassim81@gmail.com. So it's shkassim81@gmail.com.
Thank you, Doctor. And if anybody wants to get it again from me, I'm more than happy to do that. Another question. Assalamu alaikum. Would you please explain again when the Prophet said, to know me, you should know Hussain. How that can be happened? If I did not get, what does it mean? وَأَنَا مِنْ Hussain. She did not get it.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good point. So when the Prophet says, وَأَنَا مِنْ Hussain, the Prophet is saying that the Sirah al-Nabawiyah, or the example of the Prophet, was saved because of Imam Hussain. Now think about that. Without Imam Hussain, the way that Islam was practiced, the authentic way of Islam, would have been eliminated. So you would have had the Islam of Muawiyah and Yazid, and not the Islam of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Prophet says, "Wa ana min Hussain," meaning that Imam Hussain gave birth to the reawakening of the Muslim Ummah to the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's what we mean. The Al-Thawra al-Husayniyah that woke up the conscience of the people, that they remembered, oh yes, this is what the Prophet came. Because you have to remember that after the death of the Prophet, the Ummah was completely decimated. In fact, even Abu Huraira mentions this in Sahih Bukhari. Abu Huraira mentions during the time of Yazid, he says, حَفِظْتُ عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ two things. I memorized from Rasulullah two things. أَمَّا الْأَوَّلِ فَبَثِثْتَهُ أو فَأَبْثَثْتَهُ وَالْآخَرْ لَوْ أَبْثَثْتَهُ لَقُطِعَ هَذَا الْبَلْعُونَ. Abu Huraira is saying that during the time of Yazid, this is the third year, he's saying whatever I've memorized, I've spread it, meaning maybe he's memorized some hadiths or sayings, but he's saying during the time of Yazid, anyone who talks about Islam or talks about the example of the Prophet, even someone like Abu Huraira, he would have been threatened with having his throat chopped off. So when the Prophet says, Husaynun minni wa ana min Hussain, ana min Hussain means that Imam Hussain re-allowed the people to express the study of Islam as it was intended by the Prophet. Exactly, yeah, the brother makes a good point. He's saying this shows that there's continuity between Imam Hussain and the Prophet in the message, so that the message didn't end with the Prophet, but it was continued under Imam Hussain for the people and the other Imams as well. Yes. Yeah, so alhamdulillah, there's some efforts in that regard. So, I'll give you an example. In Baltimore, every year during, when I was living in the Maryland area, the masjid over there called the Islamic Education Center of Maryland, it's led by some very bright and dedicated individuals. Every year for the days of Muharram, we would invite the brothers and sisters from the other schools of thought. They would come and attend our programs, and we would even attend and invite the Christian priests from our community, and they would attend. So these are things that we need to be thinking of, not just in the United States, but in Canada as well. Inviting our brothers and sisters from the different schools of thought and from the different faiths to try to understand the message of Imam Hussain. And the dialogue is long, but yeah, there's been some opportunities to connect, alhamdulillah, with the benefit of Allah, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
One of the scientists he discovered that the question is how we could do the scholar work, or just the scholars of the West.
Yeah, that's a good point. So my brother is talking about the statistic that I mentioned yesterday, which is related by Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion. So in The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins summarizes studies from the past 70 years. It's something like 40 different studies that have looked at the relationship between religion and between education. And most of those studies were actually conducted in the West, so that's a good point. There's a disconnect in the West between science and religion, and that's happening in the East as well, unfortunately, in Islamic countries, because we have many of the Islamic scientists that are training in the West, and then they go back and they have these ideas. And Sayyid Hussain Dr, for example, he's a famous professor at George Washington University. He tries to talk about how Islam is compatible with science and things like that, and that as Muslim scientists, we should approach science not in the Western approach, but we should rather look at the example of the classical Muslim scholars like Ibn al-Haytham and others, who are both religious people, but they approach science to be able to get closer to Allah, not something that enables them to get further away from Allah. So that's a good point. Maybe with increasing globalization, maybe we'll see the same trend in the East, but so far, no one has really studied it to the same extent.
Thank you very much. I think we don't have any more questions. So I would like to once again thank Dr. Sadik for his valuable speeches and for attending our program. And we hope, inshallah, we will host him again in the future. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أكو سيارة شيفي جراي سد على الجماعة 087 WCQ شيفي جراي 087 WCQ بليز صاحبها رجاء من صاحبها وصاحبتها صحتها.
ايش عمو؟
راح نجيب لك شاي مكان.
Of sadaqah. So for example, if you see a homeless man or if you see an individual on the street that requires some help or some monetary support, you give him some money. This one-time act of charity is considered an act of sadaqah. So the Prophet ﷺ has recommended that we give sadaqah or we give charity on a daily basis. Al-sadaqah tab'id al-bala, or the sadaqah prevents the negative actions. So this is the type of charity that all of us are familiar with, the concept of a one-time act of charity. Now the issue with this one-time act of charity is after you've made the donation or after you've given this act of charity, as soon as the individual uses the thing which you've given them, then the reward that you get from that act of charity disappears. Meaning what? Let me break it down. If you give a homeless person or someone who's needy on the street $5, you'll get the reward for giving him $5. As soon as he goes to Tim Hortons and buys some Timbits and eats those Timbits, those rewards go away from you. So this is a one-time act of charity. However, a sadaqah jariyah is an act of charity that you give to an individual. Long after you've given that act of charity, the person will continue to benefit from in the long term. Now this is an important concept in the history of early Islam. And we'll go over why it's important, but first please give me a loud salawat. The early Muslim community in Medina was a community that lacked material resources. And some person in the world, but the actions of the individual should actually reflect the reality. And this is something that all of us judge on a regular basis. We judge a person not by what they say, because talk is cheap. Anyone can say anything, but rather by what their actions tell us about their character. So let's judge the Prophet ﷺ by his own words and see if his actions actually matched his words, and see whether his actions actually reflect him as being a mercy or as being a source of oppression for mankind. There's a famous hadith that's related in all of the schools of thought, both the Ahlul Sunnah and the followers of Ahlillbait, The Prophet ﷺ says, إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له. So when an individual dies, all of their actions come to an end. It doesn't matter whether you have a fancy house on the top of Montreal, or it doesn't matter if you have a fancy car in your driveway. It doesn't matter what type of degree you have, because all of those things will come to an end when you die, except three things that you leave as a legacy that enables people to either judge you as a good person or a bad person. What are these three things according to the Prophet? إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. Three things. Let's go into these three things in detail. The first thing that the Prophet talks about is the concept of sadaqah jariyah. What is sadaqah jariyah? All of you are familiar with the concept of Husainun minni wa ana min Hussain. Ahabba Allah man ahabba Husayna. It seems like what the Prophet is trying to tell us is that if we want to understand Hussein, we need to understand the Prophet, and vice versa. If we want to understand the Prophet, we need to understand Imam Hussein. These two things are interlinked and they're dependent on each other. So tonight we want to go over this hadith in depth and specifically try to understand what the Prophet is trying to tell us. Because if you look at it from a biological perspective, this hadith makes absolutely no sense. How can Husainun be minni wa ana min Hussain? The first part makes sense, Husainun minni, because he's the grandson of the Prophet. But the second part, wa ana min Hussain, meaning I am from Hussein, that makes no biological sense, because Imam Hussein is the grandson of the Prophet, so the grandson cannot give birth to the grandfather. So what is the Prophet ﷺ trying to tell us? So the point here that we'll go over is we'll try to understand the advantage or the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll try to understand how the events of Karbala are interlinked with the message of the Prophet and vice versa. The message of Imam Hussein is interlinked with the message of the Prophet. So what do we know about the Prophet ﷺ? As all of you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us what the role of the Prophet was. The role of the Prophet was as a source of mercy. Source of mercy for who? For the Iraqiyin? No, he says لِلْعَالَمِينَ, a source of...
Assalamu alaikum, dear sisters and brothers. Inshallah, tonight is our last lecture with our guest speaker, Dr. Sadik Kassim. And I leave the podium for him with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu ala al-Hussein. Assalamu ala Ali ibn al-Hussein. Assalamu ala awlad al-Hussein. Assalamu ala ashab al-Hussein. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيب قلوبنا السراج المنير المصطفى الأمجد أبا القاسم محمد. وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. أما بعد، يقول الله في المحكم بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم واعلموا أن الله يحول بين المرء وقلبه وأنه إليه تحشرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
There's a famous hadith that all of the schools of thought agree upon, and all of you are familiar with this hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ says, the mercy for the Lebanese, no. For the Magharba, no. For the Ajam, no. It says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, for all of humanity and for all of creation. Now, someone from the non-Muslim faith may come and say, well, demonstrate to me that the Prophet is a man of mercy. The Prophet ﷺ died over 1400 years ago. How can you tell me that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a man of mercy if we've never benefited from the Prophet? Meaning, you see the news events on the news, you see that so-called Islamists are bombing things left and right. Is this the message of the Prophet? If he's a man of mercy, the people who follow the message of the Prophet should by extension be a mercy as well. Because if you claim to follow an individual who's a man of mercy, then as a follower, you should be a man of mercy as well, right? This just makes logical sense. If you follow someone who's an oppressor or who's a zalim, then you, as his follower, will most likely be an oppressor or a zalim. But if you follow a man of rahmah, then you yourself should be a man of rahmah. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean when He tells us, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ? We'll go over this after a loud salawat. The best way to judge an individual is by judging their actions according to their words. Meaning, if an individual or if someone claims to be something, there's a saying, actions speak louder than words. All of you are familiar with this saying. I can tell you that I'm the smartest, most